Where we left off the other day, we had, in May of 1967, we had Gamal Abdel Nasser, who starts to do some saber in the Sinai Peninsula. In mid-May of 67, he sends 100,000 troops into the Sinai and almost 1,000 tanks. He asks the United Nations Emergency Force to leave. I shouldn't even say asks them to leave, but he tells them, he says, your welcome is no longer here, you gotta go. The United Nations Emergency Force leaves the Sinai. He closes down the Straits of Tiran, which Golda Meir had previously said after the Suez Crisis that would be a casus belli, that would be an act of war by Egypt. Israel, in the meantime, they mobilize for war. And in late May of 67, an Israeli foreign minister, a guy named Abba Eban, goes to Washington, D.C. to plead to President Johnson for American support in a conflict with Israel's Arab neighbors. Johnson says, no, you are not in any existential crisis here. You will not lose a war if others launch a war against you. And you will only be alone if you decide to go it alone. This is Johnson's famous yellow light message to Israel. All right? And this is an important change in American policy with regard to Israel. We remember back in 1956 with the Suez Crisis, over the Sinai, or went into the Sinai Peninsula, and the United States said to get out, to leave. President Eisenhower said, you've got to get out of the Sinai. In this case, Abba Eban gets the message from the United States that if you are attacked by your Arab neighbors, you will be defended by the United States. We will stand behind you. But if you launch an attack against your Arab neighbors, you're going alone. But that's an important message because Johnson does not tell Israel to not do it. All right? He doesn't give them a red light. He says if you do it, you're going to be on your own. Abba Eban takes that message back to Israel. The Israeli War Cabinet approves the operation to launch a war against Israel's neighbors, and on June 5th, 1967, war begins. Now, the Israeli war plans in the Six-Day War, in this 1967 war in June, are based on a doctrine of fighting a short, decisive, highly mobile war. Israel wants to fight a war with a mobile infantry with close air support from above. Guys, what does this sound like? A highly mobile infantry with air support from above. Sounds like blitzkrieg warfare. And I want you to use this as possibly an ammunition or something in your arsenal that you can use on topic 1 of paper 2. If you're writing some kind of military question, 20th century wars question, here's another war you can write about. And you can compare maybe the Israeli fight against its Arab neighbors in 67 to an earlier war like the Second World War. Why do you think Israel believes that the only way or the best way to fight a war is to fight a short, decisive war using blitzkrieg strategies against its neighbors? Kevin? Okay, very good. Israel is dramatically outnumbered by their Arab neighbors. They can't fight a protracted war. And it's the same thing that Germany had to be thinking in the lead up to the Second World War. Remember, why did Germany fight with a blitzkrieg strategy in the Second World War? Well, it was because of their experience in the First. Yes, sir?
Yeah, they only wanted one front.
Okay, they didn't want to fight that two-front war, sure. And then what was their memory from the First World War? Getting bogged down in the trenches, fighting a war of attrition that Germany ultimately lost, right? Because Germany was outnumbered by the Allies in World War I. Germany couldn't get resources into its nation like the Allies could because of the British blockade in World War I. So they resorted to this newer, more modern, more mobile blitzkrieg tactic. And that's what Israel wanted to do as well. On the flip side, in World War II, how was France preparing to fight the next war? Fighting another trench warfare, another war of attrition for France. And why? Were they just stupid? No, that's what they won. What's that? They built the Maginot Line. Very good. They were preparing to fight a new war of attrition. It ultimately didn't work out for them. But this is what Egypt, for example, is going to be looking towards. Egypt, in a war with Israel, doesn't want the war to be over fast. Egypt wants a protracted, static war. They want it to last a long time, because Egypt outnumbers Israel, and they feel that they can outlast their Israeli neighbors. So war comes on June 5th, and this war for Israel starts with a decisive air campaign. The Israeli Air Force flies over Egypt and neutralizes the Egyptian Air Force largely before they can get off the ground. This is a war for air superiority. Now, this would have been nice on that last practice that we did, that you knew about this war going into it. But here is a war in the second half of the 20th century where air power is absolutely decisive in the outcome, or deciding the outcome of this war. Yes, ma'am?
When you say that the Israelis flew over, like, the Egyptian
Yes.
Air Force, did they, like, bomb all their planes?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They destroyed the Egyptian, because Israel launched this war. This was a preemptive strike. This was Israel attacking before Egypt attacked, because Israel thought Egypt was going to attack. So they destroyed the Egyptian Air Force largely before the Egyptian Air Force even got off the ground. And they would do the same thing to the Jordanian and Syrian Air Forces. So by 12:45 p.m. on the first day of battle, all of the Arab air forces that Israel would be competing against have been neutralized. They've been destroyed. And now the Egyptians and the Syrians and the Jordanians, they have no air support. They have no air cover. And Israel now has the proverbial high ground for the course of the war. After the Egyptian Air Force is neutralized, Israeli tanks cross into the Sinai Peninsula. Yes, ma'am? Yes, sir.
Do we have to know every detail?
No, I'm just no. First, it's an air war. You gain the high ground. You gain air superiority. Now the tanks come in. Israeli tanks move in. Israeli paratroopers drop in around the Straits of Tiran to open up the straits and take that territory over. And within 2 days of fighting, the Israelis control the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula, all the way up to the western border of the Sinai, which is the Suez Canal. So Israel will take over the entirety of the Sinai Peninsula. The Egyptians are now out of the game, out of the fight. On June 6th, Israel will begin the war against Jordan. Now, I've already mentioned the Jordanian Air Force is gone. That's already done. Israel will send a message to the king of Jordan. We remember who he is? King Hussein. King Hussein. Israel sends a message to the king of Jordan saying, hey, we've got no beef with you. Okay, yes, we already destroyed your Air Force, but this doesn't need to go further. If you stay out of this war, we will not invade. Stay out of it. And now King Hussein is in a tough spot. And we've already mentioned the precarious place that King Hussein is in, right? If King Hussein agrees with Israel and says, fine, we won't attack you, you won't attack us, who does King Hussein alienate? Very well. He might make Nasser mad, but Nasser's already lost his war. But he's going to alienate the Palestinians in his own country, of which there are hundreds of thousands. And many of them are already angry with Nasser and his regime. In fact, what happened to Nasser's grandfather, King Abdullah? He was assassinated by Palestinians after the 1948 war. What's that?
Nasser Hussein.
Did I say Nasser?
Yes.
I meant Hussein. Hussein's grandfather, Abdullah. So Hussein has got to deal with the Palestinians in his own country. But Hussein also knows what is going to happen to his military if he goes to war with Israel. They will be defeated. He knows this. And so Hussein has to make a very difficult decision. He ultimately decides, and I guess the only way we can look at this is he decides to protect his own position rather than his military. All right? And he decides to open up fire against Israel. He starts shelling into Israel. He does not agree with Israel to no war. Essentially, Hussein is sacrificing some of his army to protect his own crown, to protect his own position, to placate the Palestinians within his own state. So the Jordanians are told that if they stay out, they'll be safe, but they end up opening fire upon Israel. So Israel invades into the West Bank, which was Jordanian territory. Israeli tanks are going to move in to the West Bank. By June 8th, on the third day of this conflict with Jordan, most of the major West Bank cities have been seized by Israeli defense forces. The bridges across the Jordan River into Jordan proper are destroyed, and Jordan is cut off from the West Bank. There will also be a war against Syria. Now, the Syrians weren't too involved on the first day of the fighting, but there was some light shelling coming from a highland area in western Syria into Israel. That's called the Golan Heights. The Israelis will also invade into Syria. They will seize the Golan Heights, those highlands between Israel and Syria, and they will continue to push east into Syria until the United Nations calls for a ceasefire between the parties. Within 6 days of fighting, Israel is absolutely victorious over Egypt and Jordan and Syria, and they have seized what become known as the occupied territories. There are 4 occupied territories after this 1967 war, and they are from Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, from Egypt, the Gaza Strip, from Jordan, the West Bank, and from Syria, the Golan Heights. Those are the 4 occupied territories. And now if we could go back really quickly, I want to take a look at this map. We looked at it a while ago. Where is that? There it is. Oh my gosh, so long ago. I want to take a look at this map. And let me find it on my screen here. Take a look at these maps. This was the map that originally was the partition proposal of the British Peel Commission back in 1937, where the purple was going to be a Jewish state and the green was going to be an Arab state. The Jews were like, we wanted more, but we can deal. The Arabs rejected that. In 1947, this is what the United Nations came up with, the United Nations Special Committee on Palestine, UNSCOP. The pink, magenta stuff would be a Palestinian state. The orange would be an Israeli state, with Jerusalem, the areas around Jerusalem, being a corpus separatum, a separate body, internationally overseen. The Jews were like, we can deal. We'd love more, but we can deal. The Arabs rejected that, and then war follows, right? At the end of that 1948 war, Israel is all of this purple. There is no Palestinian state. Gaza is taken over by Egypt. The West Bank is taken over by Jordan, all right? And then, in the aftermath of the 1967 war,